And so I'm here to encourage you to deny this request and to follow the recommendation from DAB. We feel like we have some great momentum in the neighborhood, and we can move in a positive direction. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? Saying none, thank you, sir. Oh, is that it? Okay, Mr. Florence, did you have a question? Okay. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Richard Ruth. I live in Grandview Heights. I'm a neighbor of SOSI, somewhat distant, but in support of their plan. I just want to encourage this board to look at the work that's being done by people who live there to come up with a plan to determine how they want to live and develop in Wichita. This is sort of the ultimate outcome of the Civic Engagement Academy. It's a kind of thing that we are rallying to try to encourage, and a vote to deny this expansion of a business that is already in abundance on South Broadway is in support of this desire to see this type of activity grow. You may know there's 74 used car businesses along that corridor now. And we want to just see folks have an opportunity to get in there and support other types of activities and economic activity. Thanks.
Mr. Richardson.
A question for you. Let's assume for a minute that this application's denied and we have a considerably sized empty paved lot there. What do you see going in there? I mean, what's the options for that? Do you think somebody's going to build a brand new building there and put in a restaurant or an office building, or what do you see is going to happen with that if we deny that? I mean, I think that's what we struggle with all the time is economically it doesn't look to us that there's any shortage of vacant land available for development that has not been, there's very few new buildings being built on that vacant land. It probably makes more sense to convert buildings already there to viable uses as opposed to very expensive new commercial construction. So I struggle with, if this sits there empty, what's the vision of the neighborhood that would, what would you do with this?
Yeah, well, I think when there's a line drawn by a neighborhood that says they don't want any more, that it's either gonna be supported or not supported. So, I mean, philosophically moving forward, if we continue to allow expansion and new creation, then the efforts of these people to find businesses to go in there is sort of neutered. I don't know what they would put on that property. That would be left up to them. I encourage the formation of a business development type of operation that people seeking to do business in that neighborhood could come to and get information about what is wanted, and they could inform them how to go about doing that. So at this particular property, I don't know what they would do with it. I don't know that it would necessarily be developed immediately, but as more and more businesses grow up, then vacant properties become more attractive. I think currently the abundance of these used cars lots is because there's this idea that it's better to be closer to your competition than farther away. And I think we have a situation along Broadway where that idea has sort of peaked out. It's kind of ludicrous to think that there's any merit to that idea when there are so many businesses right there. But I do think that, having a plan, drawing a line in the sand, and then supporting that is crucial for these types of neighborhood-powered redevelopment, revitalization efforts if they're going to take hold.
Additional questions for the speaker? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the applicant for rebuttal. Anything you want to say? Okay. Bring it back to the commission. Mr. Johnson.
I know we just approved that South Central plan. I know this discussion was discussed about car lots, And if I remember right, this was the understanding we would look at them on a case-by-case basis. It wasn't eliminating all of them. Is that correct?
As I recall the discussion that Mr. Hartman had with one of the neighborhood representatives, that was basically the summary that Mr. Hartman said, is that they'd continued looking at them on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. With that said, I'd move to approve. Since it is an existing lot, and I don't want to see it sit there and just let grass grow up on the pavement.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, a second by Mr. Green. Additional discussion, Mr. Blick.
Well, it sounds like that the applicant is actually using a lot. They were just being non-conforming, non-compliance, and then now they're trying to be compliant. But at the same time, as what we said before, we have approved the neighborhood plan. We've talked about these car lots, and I wouldn't be in support of it.
The central portion of this property is legal, and there have been some cars on that, but the north and south parts of the property are what we're wanting to expand in.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Blick, ask your question.
Question for you. Are you going to... So the question was asked earlier is it going to be an abandoned lot? Are you going to close your business if this doesn't get approved or be approved?
I can't speak for the owner. The owner hasn't spoken to me about that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Thank you. Oh, Mr. Florence?
Hey, how long has this current owner been in that particular property?
I don't have that information. I'm sorry.
Well, I think the original conditional use was 2004. Is that right, Matt? Where's Matt?
Yeah, the first conditional use they applied for was back in 2003. That was for the whole area. And I believe they got that approved by Planning Commission, but never followed through with taking it to City Council for some reason. And so then they came back in 2004 for just the smaller area. But I don't have information on if it's the same owner.
Ms. Miles?
I'd like to offer a substitute motion to deny based on the fact that, again and again, we have these neighborhood plans that we don't comply with, and I think we'll never make progress if we don't comply with these plans.
I have a motion and a second. Additional discussion on the substitute motion. I'm going to go, I understand where we're wanting to go with this neighborhood, but you've got an existing business that's operating, and so I'm going to go back with and support the original motion. Any additional comments? Those in favor of the substitute motion signify with the uplifted hand. So 3, 4. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The substitute motion is defeated.
Who were the four?
The 4 to
And dual play.
Yeah.
Miles and Florence.
Yeah. Brings us back to the original motion to approve. Those in favor of the original motion signify with the uplifted hand. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those opposed? Passes 7-4. Next item, please.
Good afternoon again. Philip Zievenberg, an associate planner. Conditional use 2019-45, the applicant is requesting a conditional use to permit a nightclub in the city on a property zone limited commercial. You can see the property here on the map on the west side of South Meridian. It's about a half a mile south of West Pawnee. Its address is 2789 South Meridian. The Unified Zoning Code defines a nightclub in the city as an establishment located within the city that provides entertainment, which may include the provision for dancing by employees or patrons, and where cereal malt beverage or alcoholic liquor are offered, consumed, or served to the public or its members, and may or may not serve food. When a LC zoned location with a nightclub is requested and it's within 300 feet of a church or place of worship, public park, public or parochial school, or residential zoning district, approval of this has to be done by conditional use, and this is why this case is before you here today. I've got a graphic here. The red line around the property signifies that 300-foot buffer. All of these properties on the east side of Meridian, as well as directly south of the property and even directly behind the property, are all zoned single family. Properties north of it, though they're not single family zoning, you have a church here and a place of worship at this location. So with that, there are over a dozen residentially zoned properties as well as 2 places of worship within the 300-foot buffer, which is why we're here talking about the conditional use. There's no history of a conditional use for a nightclub at this site. The applicant currently operates a restaurant at this location. The request for a nightclub is to permit bands and other events to come and perform at the location. I've talked with zoning enforcement, and they have notified me that they have submitted an application for a drinking establishment restaurant license. However, that has not been approved at this time. The zoning inspector assigned to this case has mentioned that the establishment has yet to meet the requirements to satisfy this fire inspection at the location. The site does not have an entertainment license either. They would have to get one of those from zoning inspection as well before they could operate the nightclub. Wichita Police Department has confirmed that the subject site has been investigated regarding noise complaints for loud music by numerous neighbors. I have received numerous phone calls from neighbors who are strictly opposed to this becoming a nightclub. There are actually 2 handouts in front of you with this case number on there, which are written responses from a couple neighbors who were not able to attend this meeting, but they wanted to notify you of their position. The property to the north, as we saw on the zoning map, is zoned GO and LC. General office and limited commercial. One is a church and one is a commercial business. As we mentioned before, properties on the east, south, and west are zoned single family SF5. This property right here that's zoned LC is a HVAC company. South Meridian is a 5-lane paved arterial. East or West 27th Street is a 2-lane paved collector street. All municipal services are available on the site. The future growth map and the comprehensive plan identifies this area kind of with a mix of residential and commercial uses, which could provide the opportunity for the development of either residential or commercial uses on the property. The locational guidelines for commercial uses discusses that it would be more like convenience, retail, restaurants, small offices, and personal services when located in close proximity to residential areas. Because of that, staff feels that a nightclub is an inappropriate use based on the proximity of those residential neighborhoods, residential zoning lots, as well as the places of worship as we have previously discussed. With that, it is staff's recommendation that this case be denied, primarily on the grounds of the proximity issue related to those properties that are located within 300 feet of this property. However, it is in the opinion of the Planning Commission that they feel that this is appropriate to approve. We have several conditions, one of which is that there be no outdoor seating, speakers, or entertainment permitted, and any noise or music generated indoors for entertainment would meet the standards of the Wichita Noise Ordinance, and that it would be developed to with an approved site plan showing parking, screening, gate, dumpsters, and everything that would have to be required by code in general. And that all applicable state, local, and other permits and inspections would be acquired before operation. Got some pictures of the site. This is looking from the parking lot, so the building is more closer to the western boundary of the property. This is kind of the entrance ramp and parking lot area. I'm looking across Meridian at the houses over there. This is south of the property, looking at the building in question. And this building right here to the north is one of the churches. This building here is that HVAC company I spoke of. This is on the north part of the property. This is that commercial building, and there's that same church we just spoke of. This is looking north towards Meridian, or up Meridian. This is looking south of the property of the houses that are directly across the street. This is a little off from the site. I'm across the street on Meridian, looking kind of southwest corner, this lot here is this house, but behind that house is an apartment complex that is within the 300-foot radius as well. This is across the street from Meridian, looking west towards the building in question. And this is looking west along West 27th Street with the buildings that are across the street. And there's this residence right here, right at the edge of the parking lot. And with that, I can stand for any questions.
Questions for Philip? Mr. Florence?
WPD has said that there has been a lot of noise from this.
Correct. They have been cited, specifically one instance of a very large gathering, for lack of a better term, with significant amount of loud music. And I don't know how many noise complaints have come in, but I reached out to them with this case, and they responded back saying that yes, there has been at least one instance of a noise ordinance that was cited. And then when talking with the neighbors, it seems that there have been multiple times where maybe not a noise ordinance being, noise infraction being cited, but at least the presence of loud music that has disturbed the neighbors as a nuisance.
Additional questions? Thank you. Thank you, Philip. Agent or applicant? State your name and address for the record, and you'll have 10 minutes.
My name is Al Wakil, 1104 West 31st Street South. I own significant amount of real estate in the South Side. We spend millions of dollars redeveloping. Anything south of Pawnee to Seneca to 31st, all that area need a lot of money to develop. The city does not spend enough money there, the private sector does. I own Seneca Square. I owned the Hyper Pet and sold it. Now is the storage to serve the community, over hundreds of storages about to open up by another company. I am the landlord, and the person sitting there have the restaurant. All they want to do is bring a band to the venue for weddings mostly. But in order to do that, they have to have a bar license. The church, which is south or north of the building, I have talked to them. They never indicate. He has my personal number. He never indicated one way or the other if there is any opposition. Matter of fact, there's some of their horses in the back of our yard feeding and playing or whatever. The crack house, which is right here.
We can't hear you when you go step away, so staff, could you show them how to use the mouse?
Okay, there was a crack house right behind the property. It was condemned by the city. It was resold in an auction. If we leave these real estate abandoned, all they're gonna do is steal the copper, the air conditioning, and everything else. I spent millions of dollars rehabbing the South Side. I put in a trust bank on 31st and Seneca. That's my property. Mid-Express, which is Bosley's Tires. That was my property. Across the street where Price Optical, Dr. Green, that's my property. Seneca Square as well. But we try to spend a lot of money to develop the area. Maybe the neighbors, one or two screaming about some. But at the same time, we spend a lot of money developing that, and I have other undeveloped areas where I spend money and try to make it better. All he's asking for, to bring a band when they have a wedding. That band, as probably Phil will let us know, is the same license for a bar. Anytime you have music, if you have a band, you're gonna have to have the bar license. Not necessarily is a bar. They do have a restaurant up there, and they have a venue room, and that's what they want to do.
Questions for the speaker? I see none. Thank you, sir. Anybody from the audience wish to speak on this issue, step forward, state your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Tabitha Lehman, 3254 South Custer. I'm speaking as a homeowner. I do not live in this direct vicinity, but I'm also speaking as the treasurer of Southwest Village Neighborhood Association, which this property is within the limits of. I would just say we have owned our property for coming close to 23 years now, and I believe there used to be a bar, I think, in there. It's called Sticks, and it was a source of problem for the community. I would ask that you take the recommendation of the staff that this is an inappropriate use. If this is simply for weddings, things like that, that's not such a big deal to me, but this zoning doesn't say that's all they can do. They can do whatever they want once that zoning is changed. So I wish there was an in-between, because honestly that doesn't cause me any heartache, but it's the fact that it is nightclub zoned once it's there and that's it. And we have enough issues in this community keeping it from being blighted and having problems. We don't need to bring that type of business within the neighborhood. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you, ma'am. Before I go to the next speaker, let me ask staff, is there a way to do a conditional use to cover both ends?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, we had a conditional use at our last meeting where we discussed at great length a nightclub that would be geared towards wedding and other types of receptions. That is not the application that was submitted to staff for this property.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you very much. Michael O'Donnell. My address is 610 South Sheridan Street, 67213. I don't live in the area, but I do represent the area on the county commission and have had a number of residents reach out to me very concerned about this property, about the rezoning and use of that property. In fact, just yesterday, a flyer went out with both myself and the phone numbers of myself and Councilmember Blubaugh, and I can assure you my phone was blowing up yesterday about this rezoning. But it's great. I love talking to everyone, let them know that I understand the concerns. I wouldn't want it next to my house either. I do want to publicly acknowledge that, yes, Mr. Wakil has done a lot of stuff for South Wichita. There's no question about it. I appreciate he has cleaned up 31st and Seneca so much. He's done so many good things for South Wichita. I just don't think this is the best place considering keeping the conformity to the neighborhood. The neighbors are concerned. I had to agree with them when they said they wouldn't want that in their backyard. I agreed I wouldn't want it in my backyard either. But being opposed to that doesn't discount or repudiate or ignore the fact that the Wakils have invested millions of dollars. When he says he's invested millions of dollars in South Wichita, that is true. Very few people have put more money into South Wichita in the last decade than him. So this is not a reflection on that, but it is a reflection of standing up for the Southwest Village Association and Neighborhood Association and the concerns from the neighbors that I've had, that I just wanted to come and express just how they're pretty concerned, worked up, and that I also agree that this staff did the right thing. The staff recommendation is what I would endorse as well. So thank you very much, members of the commission. Appreciate being here today.
Questions for the speaker? Mr. O'Donnell, I got a question for you. Obviously, vacant properties create problems.
Yes, sir.
You heard the speaker, the applicant say that they're wanting to just not really do a full-fledged bar, but a restaurant venue that would serve alcohol and allow and have a band with a restrictive covenant put on. Do you think that the can't?
Yeah, and I don't think the neighbors.
Can't be done then.
I don't think the neighbors would be comfortable with that right now, mainly because of the there have been so many police calls that have been down there. I've talked to a friend on the South Beat that informed me of that, and that's the issue. Is when you rent out your property, you're not in control of what that individual does. And I know that's not Mr. Wakil's issue, but I do know the concerns of the neighbors. So
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Additional questions? Next speaker, please.
My name is Dick Kovich, 3150 South Gale Circle. I'm the president of the Southwest Village Neighborhood Association. Had a lot of concerns addressed to me about this turning into a nightclub. I did talk to the owner of the business that's on the corner right here about that business, and the heating and air all share the same parking lot. So there was, I would think, some concern about liability if something should happen on their property or their property, since it is all open parking. The major concern that I've been asked to address is these are single-family housing. There's a city, I guess, ordinance about putting nightclubs and bars close to family housing and a church. In fact, there's 2 churches here. I wasn't able to get a hold of the owner of this. Heating and air conditioning is still under construction here. But anyway, just address my concern about anything outside what the city has already addressed as being appropriate for a nightclub.
Questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Buenos días. My name is Rosa Perez, 2210 Casado. I could see Calvary Church from my yard, and I have witnessed things after that Sticks bar opened that I'm not going to mention in public. It's very degrading to have people act like that in your neighborhood, and it scares people who are trying to raise their kids. I don't want it in my neighborhood. You could go dance somewhere else. You want to dance, have a good time, go to church. We don't need no more of this nonsense. And I hate to say it, but I call all of these clubs panty clubs because they are meant to degrade women and make money for the men. Thank you for your time.
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Caleb Clausen, 2909 North Meadow Oaks Court. I don't live in the vicinity, but I own a rental property just south, adjacent here. So we've put a bunch of money improving this property, and we think that a nightclub and like night noise is going to reduce the value of our home and reduce the future income that property produces. So I've self-improved this home, and so I've done some like quiet improvements up to like the middle of the night, and you can hear, they mentioned some large gathering went on. Well, there was a big party through midnight where I could hear from the inside my property what was going on. So we think that's going to negatively affect our future income and attracting a good tenant, potentially a family, to occupy that property.
Questions for the speaker?
Got a question.
Mr. Richardson?
What's the address of your rental property?
2531 West 27th Street South. It's this one right here. You can see it on one of the slides. It's pretty nice. No.
Thank you. Yeah.
Next speaker, please.
Hi friends, Becky Jenick again. I live at 5520 West 37th Street South, in case you missed it the first time. I am the secretary for the Southwest Neighborhood Association, which is the neighboring association to Southwest Village. And I can tell you this property has been the subject of our conversations since June of this year, if not longer. I would offer that noise complaints are not the only complaints that have come from that residence, but also illegal gambling, vandalism, theft, things like that, because of what's going on this property. Turning this into a nightclub will not help with those issues. If anything, it'll just promulgate the issues to happen even more. And I take offense to the fact that those residents were called crackheads that lived in the area. I've spent 2 summers personally interacting with the residents in this community, and I can tell you they are hardworking, tax-paying residents of this city and county. And again, ask yourself, what would you want in your backyard? I would offer that if somebody wants to hold a wedding or an event, they can get a catering license to temporarily hold an event at that facility. We don't need to turn it into a nightclub, which has already been pointed out, opens it up to many more things. Anyhow, thank you for listening, and I stand for questions.
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
Thank you for your passion. We need it.
Seeing that, I'll bring it back to the agent or applicant for rebuttal, and you'll have 2 minutes.
You know, wedding is a community function. These people would not have a family if they didn't have a wedding. Now, all of a sudden, it is imposed on their neighborhood. When we spend a lot of money to improve the neighborhood, if that building becomes vacant, it will be just like the Thunderbird bowling alley on Pawnee and Oliver. That's my property. We suffered over $600,000. There's almost 15 or 17 reports of theft and vandalism. As a priority is none, because it is a property damage. If these neighbors leave it empty and people start stealing, they're gonna steal from me first, they're gonna steal from them next. They indicated there's no crack house. I can prove to you there was a crack house over there who was abandoned. That's beside the point. All I'm asking is a reasonable wedding to be had in that vicinity for my customer. And I make a living also, just like the gentleman said, he has a rental. I probably spent 20 times more than he did on my property, and I like to have the right to make money as well. I appreciate Mr. McDonald's input, and he see what I do. All I'm asking, if there is anything between where we can have a wedding with a few drinks, then they go home. Is that reasonable enough? And what is that license is supposed to be?
Questions for the speaker, Ms. Miles?
I'm sorry. Will you be able to continue to use this facility as a restaurant as you're currently using?
You have to ask the tenant.
Additional questions? Thank you, sir. Bring it back to the commission.
I'm going to move to take the recommended action from the planning department.
So a motion to deny? Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Mr. Florence? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Additional discussion. Mr. Foster?
I frankly don't have a full understanding of how this property is used currently and what's being proposed in the future. I mean, we can take the land use issue or the zoning issue at face value, but I don't really feel there's a good understanding of those first two items I mentioned. Can anybody help me on that?
I can tell you that the staff recommendation is based on an application that was submitted to continue to operate as a bar and grill and to add bands and events to the operations of the bar and grill. That is the application that was made. The information today about having a wedding event venue, that's the first time that information's been introduced. All of the other event centers that you have approved, including the one that you considered at your last meeting, those are event centers that are not open to the public on a regular basis. They are only open on a periodic basis for events. That is not the application that the applicant submitted for your consideration today. If they are suggesting that, I suggest that the Planning Commission require them to refile.
Mr. Foster, you look like you have another question.
Well, I just want to make sure that the property owner, you know, it's exactly as you're stating there, and the intent is not to consider it as an event center.
As I said, that's the first time I heard that the request was for an event center for weddings was at this hearing today. That is not the application that was submitted for consideration.
Let me ask a question in that regard. When we deny, there's a certain period of time before they can come back and resubmit. If the resubmittal is for something different, can they bring that back quicker?
They can, that's correct. That would be able to come back within 6 months.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor of the motion signify with the upraised hand. Unanimous. Next item, please. I'll tell you what, let's take a 5, we got any more? We just got one more item. Okay.
And then we got the BZA.
Okay, are those going to be long or short?
The BZA goes in conjunction with this conditional use 46.
If 4.5 doesn't go, you don't need to hear
Okay, we'll go, continue on.
We're good? Okay. Again, for the record, Philip Zievenberg, an associate planner. Conditional use 1946, the applicant submitted a conditional use request to allow group residence limited on a property zone SF5 single-family residential. You can see on the plan here that is located just a little bit east of North Edgemore Drive, about 1 block south of East 13th Street North. The applicants currently operate the Rosewood Cottage, which is a Home Plus group home on a property and currently houses up to 8 residents in addition to 2 staff. The request for group residence limited would allow the facility to house up to 12 residents in addition to staff. The Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services, or KDADS, generally defines a Home Plus as a residence facility caring for not more than 12 individuals not related within the 3rd degree of relationship to the operator or owner by blood or marriage who need personal care or supervised nursing care to help with limitations in activities of daily living. And I'll let the applicant go a little bit more into what potentially a Home Plus facility looks like. The Unified Zoning Code defines group residence as a residential facility providing cooking, sleeping, and sanitary accommodations for a group of people, not defined as a family on a weekly or longer basis. It defines group resident limited as a group residence that is occupied by 6 to 15 persons. This is actually a correction to your staff report. So group residence that is occupied by 6 to 15 persons, including staff members who reside in the facility. Such a use is permitted within the SF5 district with the approval of a conditional use. The facility in question today, get to the site plan here, is an existing single-family home that is located in a single-family neighborhood. The home was built in 1954. It has 6 bedrooms and 3,084 square feet of furnished living space. The 2-car garage, as you can see on the site plan here, has been converted to living space that is accounted for in that square footage. The facility is licensed by KDADS to have up to 12 residents, and it has met all necessary requirements by the staff, Kansas State Fire Marshal, as well as the National Fire Protection Association. The applicants state that the purpose of the Home Plus facility is to provide a small retirement care location in a residential area so that residents can live in a traditional home environment near their families. The facility will not require any modifications either on the inside or the outside in order to accommodate the additional residents. The off-street parking requirement for group residents limited is 1 per bedroom. The facility has 6 bedrooms, therefore would require 6 parking spaces. The applicants have indicated that none of their residents in their care drive or own vehicles, and as they are care dependent. Therefore, the only vehicles parked on site would be those of the 2 staff members or any family members or friends who are coming to visit. The facility's driveway can accommodate 2 cars, and the applicant, as I mentioned before this case, has filed a variance to reduce the parking requirement from 6 to 2, which we'll subsequently hear, in order to meet this parking requirement for this use if it is approved with this conditional use. Properties to the east, northwest, and south are zoned single-family with single-family residences. Access to the property is off of East Polo Drive, which is a paved local street with on-street parking. And North Edgemore Drive at this location is considered a paved 2-lane local street. I know it has higher classifications further south, but just south of 13th Street is considered a local street. The comprehensive plan identifies this area as residential. It is within the established central area, which encourages infill. Residential classification offers the full diversity of residential development. The plan specifically discusses a range of housing densities and types anywhere from single-family residential, detached homes to multifamily units, condominiums. It makes a specific reference to special residential accommodations for the elderly, such as assisted living, congregate care, and nursing homes. Based on the evidence that we have seen with this application, staff is recommending approval of this, subject to the following conditions. First one being that it would have a maximum occupancy of 12 residents, which they couldn't exceed under their current licensure anyway. Residents within the care of the facility would be prohibited from having personal vehicles at the location, which again would most likely not happen anyway because they aren't able to drive. And then the others are just making sure that they comply with all local and state and federal regulations, as well as submitting a site plan to be approved by staff. I can show you the area around. This is standing right in front of the house, looking kind of to the east-southeast along Polo. You can see the residential houses across the street. This is the facility. As you can see, it is a single-family home, looks like a single-family home. Neighboring houses next door, different angle of the house, kind of looking to the northwest. I've been told by the applicant, she can clarify, but I believe that this property here, as well as the one across the street to the south, are also Home Plus care facilities. So there's actually kind of a cluster of them along East Polo Drive. This is looking to the west towards North Edgemoor. And with that, I can stand for any staff questions.
Questions for Philip? Mr. Foster.
Philip, in the conditions, would it make sense to add that its approval is subject to the BZA case? I don't see that in here.
No, because the BZA case would mean nothing if this case is not approved by itself. The BZA, the parking requirement is only in effect as group residence limited. Well, as a group home, it doesn't have the same parking requirement.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you. Agent or applicant, if you'd come forward, please state your name and address for the record. You have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Rana Zayed, 3450 North Ridgewood Street. Thank you for having me here, commissioners. I am the owner of Rosewood Cottage, and as Phil mentioned, we are a licensed Home Plus, licensed through the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services. We're inspected, regulated, and annually surveyed by them. We're also inspected and approved by the state fire marshal. And part of this inspection allotted us to be able to house 12 residents in our community. Rosewood Cottage is a residential assisted living and memory care facility, staffed 24/7 with nursing staff. Our residents are elderly. They are dependent on our care physically and mentally. We strive to provide them a community that can give them back a sense of community, and being able to do that includes being able to have more than 8 residents. It is an active environment. We have scheduled activities, visitors, informational sessions, anything we can do for our residents to make it feel more like home. Thank you. I stand for any questions.
Any questions for the speaker? Mr. Florence.
I guess, my issue is that if you're going to increase the number of residents, but, I know it's going into the BZA case, but you don't increase the number of parking, where, do these people normally have visitors?
Yes, that is a great question. They do have visitors, probably once or twice a week, and they stay for approximately 30 minutes, and it has not been an issue whatsoever.
Any additional questions for the speaker? Mr. Richardson.
There is parking allowed on the street, is that correct?
Yes.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you. Anybody from the audience wish to speak on this issue? So come forward, state your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. We are the Grants, and we live exactly across the street from these facilities. And sometimes, what I don't understand, why didn't they get the zoning? They put the home in, and then want zoning. We didn't know anything about this. They just I just feel like they just kind of broke out over us. Now, for us, the parking is concerned, it gets difficulty. I don't like seeing cars all in my front yard. I mean, I'm on the streets. And when I back out now, I have to really be careful because sometimes that hole on my side and their side is cars. Because people will come to visit their people, which I understand. They good neighbors, I guess. You know, I don't know them. They don't know us. They have never said anything to us. And I don't understand how you can start a business, then get it zoned. It should have been zoned before they came there. And the parking sometimes is tough. I almost had a wreck coming out of my driveway. I dragged out there, look, I stopped, look, it's cars. I make sure that I can get out of my own driveway sometimes. It's not that way all the time, but when you have visitors, the parking, I don't like it. Matter of fact, when we moved there 30 years ago, when nobody parking on the street. And it's really inconvenient to us. But for us neighbors, they seem to be like they're pretty good neighbors. I don't bother them, they don't bother me.
And they keep the property.
And they keep the property up pretty good. But what I just want to know, why come they did not get their zoning before they put the business in? Is that?
Any questions for the speakers? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else wish to speak on this issue? Agent or applicants, you have 2 minutes for rebuttal.
I want to thank the neighbors for coming to speak. We do respect your opinion on this. I also do want to point out that when we opened up Rosewood Cottage earlier this fall, we were not actually aware that this was a restriction. And so that's kind of why we weren't able to do it before. Also, with seeing how much our residents are thriving in this type of community, you know, being mentally stimulated, especially our residents who suffer from dementia, we are very eager to expand for more than 8 residents. I do also want to point out with the 2 home pluses to the right and then across from the one to the right, it could easily be their cars who are parked on the street. Additionally, across this street and probably next to the neighbor's house is a group home for young adults and children. I also would like to mention that our property is very safe. It is equipped with a full fire sprinkler system, fire alarm system, surveillance, a locked unit for dementia elopement risks. Additionally, we do maintain the property for upkeep for our community members, for our neighborhood, and also for the overall Sedgwick County. I would also like to invite neighbors over to tour our community and join the residents for a meal. Thank you. I stand for any questions.
Any additional questions? Mr. Foster.
Staff might need to help on this, but you might be able to answer the question. And that relates to the zoning that the gentleman asked about. When you have up to 8, I'm assuming that that's allowed in by right, and there's no zoning required. Is that correct?
Yes. Up to 8 residents is considered a group home, which is allowed by right. Anywhere above 8 requires getting group residents limited, which allows you to expand technically even up to 15, but they're only asking for 12.
And the second question relates to insurance. You know, when you get potentially bringing more traffic here, does your insurance speak to this, or the fact that it's in a public right-of-way, insurance isn't going to touch this?
We do have a very extensive insurance policy on several things regarding Rosewood Cottage. We've got some for the property, some premise liability and general liability. We also have multiple types of insurances for anything occurring within Rosewood Cottage, on our residents, their property, and so forth. And those insurance agents are aware of our capacity and have tailored our policies for that.
Mr. Richardson?
Philip, we use throughout here a sort of indication that says a home plus group home. Is that a state designation? Where does that nomenclature come from?
Yes, a home plus is what the Department of Aging and Disability Services, KDADS, calls this type of residential assisted living facility. And by state regulations, a home plus is an assisted living facility that can house only up to 12 residents.
Thank you.
Ms. Miles?
Can I ask you if this should be approved, but not allow the variance for only having 2 parking spaces? Do you have area that you could create additional parking spaces?
I don't believe we do. We do have a very large yard, but I would probably have to seek advice from my architect to see if we could turn it into parking space. But none of our residents can drive, so it would just be our staff members who bring cars and their occasional visitors.
Mr. Florence?
Dale, am I correct? You are allowed to use up to 50% of your front yard for parking if you want to go in and expand that parking lot?
I'd have to look at the exact piece, but I think we should talk about the parking when we talk about the variance item.
Okay, any additional questions? Thank you. Bring it back to the commission for consideration.
I move that we approve the request.
Have a motion to approve. Is there a second? There's a second by Mr. Johnson. Any additional comments? Ms. Miles?
I'd like to make a substitute motion that we approve, but that require a minimum of 4 parking spaces.
I might point out that there is a Board of Zoning Appeals item related to the parking that there will be a public hearing on separately.
Means we're going to deal with parking in just a moment.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion.
I have a question.
Mr. Richardson?
So the question would be, Scott, if this is approved without the Board of Zoning Appeals, they would have to have a total of 6, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
You'd have to have 6 parking spaces.
Thank you.
And what I'd like to have is a minimum of 4.
Mr. Florence?
Well, according to the regulations, they're allowed up to 15 people by regulations. Am I right?
That is correct. However, our conditions of approval restrict them to 12.
Any additional questions? We have a motion for approval. Those in favor signify with the upraised hand. Those opposed? This is 9-2. Miles and Florence. Okay. We have no more items for the commission meeting, so we will adjourn the commission meeting and open the Board of Zoning Appeals. First item. Only item. Philip, we've pretty well heard it, so if you can do this in 30 seconds or less, I'll give you a sucker.
Yes, I will take this time to specifically go over the 5 points that a variance requires. As he mentioned, we basically know the background of what's going on here. Variances require the applicant to answer the 5 statements, specifically regarding the uniqueness of the property. The applicant states that the Rosewood Cottage provides a residential setting for elderly members of the community to have a unique alternative to their traditional institutional care. They mentioned that the Rosewood Cottage residents do not drive, and therefore the only parking on there would be for the staff members as well as those who come to visit. Regarding the effects to the adjacent property, the applicant states that it is, again, only the staff members and those visiting the Rosewood Cottage who would be driving there, and the length of a average visit is about 30 minutes. To request the reduction in parking to 2 vehicles is what the request is based on that information, and that this would not have an adverse effect on the property owners and the residents surrounding there. They did mention additionally that the homes adjacent to the property on the west side are licensed Home Plus facilities as well. Regarding the hardship of the strict application of the code, again, if the strict application of the code being 6 spaces were to be applied, that would provide, in their opinion, an unnecessary hardship. Again, since the residents within there are elderly, and most of them are even incapable of driving, let alone having cars to drive. And that the ability to expand their facility to 12 residents would allow for more integration and a higher level of care for not only more residents to have the opportunity to be part of the Rosewood Cottage, but also to have that mental stimulation that she spoke of earlier. That would help with the inevitable decline of their mental condition. Regarding the public interest, they feel that this is in the public interest in order to do so that it wouldn't have any detriment to the health, safety, or welfare of this surrounding neighborhood, and that ultimately it is in the spirit and intent of the code to approve the reduction of the parking requirement down to 2. After reviewing their conditions, staff is recommending approval of the reduction from 6 spaces to 2. Subject to them providing a site plan that we would approve, and that they, again, the residents of the care facility would not be able to provide any cars on property that they own, as well as all state and local and applicable laws and regulations would have to be followed.
Can you bring up a photo of the property?
Yes. So this one might be a little more. We can see the amount of curb on both sides, as well as technically it's their driveway where it's their applicable off-street parking area.
Additional questions, Mr. Blick?
This might be a silly question. Do they have to have one stall as a handicap because they're serving for disability individuals or not, or is it or not?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'll defer to Scott, who looks like he's looking it up.
While they're looking that up, we'll go to Mr. Richardson.
Philip, I'm looking at the drawing here, and it looks like from the face of the garage out to the curb is about 60 feet. I mean, realistically, you can park more than 2 cars in that driveway. I guess the question is,
correct,
is that legal?
That doesn't count as multiple parking stalls because you're blocking vehicles in.
Okay, but again, as a practical matter for staff, you could put 4 cars in that driveway and still not be close to the street. Looks to me like.
Correct. By my calculations, you could at least do 4 cars, if not trying to squeeze 6 in there, and they'd be really boxed in.
Mr. Johnson?
This isn't a question. Right now, they can have 8 people there and there's no parking requirements. Now we add 4 people and then we're gonna have 6 parking stall requirement. I think that's a little bit distorted, and especially what it's being used for. There is a public street, very nice appearance facility. I'd hate to see the whole front yard in asphalt with parked cars in it. We don't want that. Let's leave it like it is. It's working. Let's don't make it more complicated.
While Scott's looking it up, Jeff and I think that as long as you have 4 or fewer spaces, you don't have to provide a handicap stall, but that's just memory.
While they're doing that, does the agent or applicant want to make another presentation? Okay. Mr. Florence, just a second.
I think a lot has already been said, kind kind of just explaining why we would never really have more than 2 cars unless they were a visitor for a short period of time. But I also really agree with Commissioner Johnson when he said we don't want to see this entire yard just turn into asphalt. Part of the intrigue to Rosewood Cottage is the landscaping. Families love that it looks residential, and I really would hate to see this assisted living community look more commercial, and I don't think that that would really benefit our neighborhood either if it looked more commercial. Thank you.
Mr. Florence?
My issue is that, you know, we know that it adversely affects the neighborhood because you had the guy directly across the street that said he has problems getting in and out, and eventually somebody is going to have a wreck. Now, you can add, I don't know if it's maybe 1 more parking spot or 2 without distorting the front of that house.
Thank you. Additional questions for the speaker? So, Mrs. Miles?
Yeah, I'm not wanting to distort the front of the property. My concern is, as we did previously here, that there are some parking issues for the street parking because there's a couple of different types of these group homes in the neighborhood. And I just wonder at what point in time, when we continue to allow a variance, do we congest the neighborhood or the street so badly because we've continued to allow these variances? And I don't think that we should require them 6, but we are going from 8 residences to 12 residences. And I don't know how that will or could change visitation, so.
Scott, you had some information for us?
In terms of the question about allowance of parking, what you were referring to, Commissioner Florence, is a restriction on the amount of the front setback that can be paved, and that is limited to, in this case, would be 750 square feet. It's 50% of the setback area, or 750 square feet, whichever is less. So the setback area on this property is about 2,600 square feet, which will be 1,300 feet. So 750 would apply. The zoning code does not reference whether or not there is a required accessible space for this use or not. So that would be something that would be in the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I don't have any information on that with me right now.
Okay. Any additional questions for the applicant? Okay. We'll open it up for public. Anybody in the audience wish to speak on this? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. It's back to us. Mr. Johnson.
Well, since we don't really know who's parking their car across the street, I mean, we got no control of that. I'm going to make a motion to approve as requested.
Second.
We have a motion to approve by Mr. Johnson, a second by Mr. Green. Additional comments? Those in favor of that motion signify with the uplifted hand. Those opposed? 9-2. Passes 9-2.
Florence and Miles.
Okay, before I close out, we got some goodbyes to say. You had a pretty good meeting there, so we'll let you go with a big smile on our face and appreciate everything you've done for 33 years of service to the city and the county. Thank you very much for your service. Anybody else want to add to that?
Thank you very much. It's been a long, strange ride, to quote somebody from the Grateful Dead, I believe. But I certainly have appreciated the opportunities, particularly these last 3 or 4 years here as director. So thank you very much.
Dale, I'd like you just to comment on all your bosses that you had.
He's still got 2 weeks.
Yeah. Thank you for your service. It's been a pleasure to work with you. I think all of us will back that up. It's been great. So thank you. With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Soccer's